Okay, so if we were to sum up or describe person-centered planning in one sentence, what might that sound like?
For me, person-centered planning is people coming together, dreaming together, and thinking about how can we support and create a good life in society for the person that we're planning together with. And person-centered planning is for everyone. So just as the title of the book, all means all.
Why should you know about this, especially as a teacher?
Yeah, for teachers, person-centered planning is interesting because it helps to start dialogue. And of course, teachers have lots of dialogues, but not in any case with children. It helps to think outside of the box, not in the place of the institution. It helps to see the whole person and their future, not just a student in mathematics or so. It helps to reflect on your own role as a teacher, and it helps to install openings to how to start person-centered planning processes.
Yeah, my name is Ines and I'm a very lucky person because I had the chance to learn about future planning and support circles and personal-centered planning, and I moderated a lot of these circles. But I really have to warn everybody because it's quite something you can be longing for if you know how to do it. Because it's a very essential thing and a very, I don't know, it's a key thing for feeling humanism is in the world. And to give just one example, it's not something or not a situation I was moderating, but when I heard this story, then I was sure that I want to do things like this. So there was a young man who already when he started as a little child to think about his future, he thought about what would I like to work in? I want to become a doctor, a medical doctor. This is what he said. So this is something maybe some of us said, but the fact when he explained this to his mother was a little bit special because he had Down syndrome. So the 21st chromosome was 3 times there. And in that case, our societies seem to know what is possible and what is not possible. So the mother felt all the time, oh, how can I explain to him that this will never happen and no university will accept him? And oh, this was the main dynamic in the family. So the wonderful thing about when he was a youngster and the mother told others, oh, he all the time tells me he will be a medical doctor in a hospital. How shall I stop him from this stupid idea? Then they built a circle around him, they had a meeting and they did some person-centered planning. So they gathered all friends around, and the people who moderate or facilitate these processes, they know that it's a gift if somebody has a certain dream. Sometimes you have to work for the dream first, but now this young man all the time was talking about his dream. And then the group has the challenge now to find out what is the quality of this dream and what is behind all this and what does it mean for you to be a doctor or for him if you can't express it. And yeah, it's to be an important person, a helpful person, maybe it's how to be dressed then and to receive respect because of what you're doing and so on. So the wonderful thing about this circle was that they were thinking in that way, okay, we have to find a situation for him and create it, if it's not already existing, where he can have all these qualities without going to university. Yeah. And luckily, one of the friends sitting there, she knew somebody who knew somebody and who was the wife of, and you need sometimes all these kinds of relationships. So to make it shorten, the outcome of the whole thing was that he got a job in a clinic for coma, people who lay in coma, do we say patients too? Patienten. And yeah, his job was wearing a white skirt, going into the rooms, filling in the hygienic stuff for the hands, see that everything is there, what is needed when the beds will be made new. And he was also allowed to sit at beds of people and touch the hands, talk to the people, be soft with them, tell them some stories about what is going on outside. Could cry when I tell you this. And yeah, then he generously didn't miss any medical studies, and he never asked for a university. He was happy being a relevant person in this surrounding, and it was a fulfill of his dream at a very young stage. And maybe one day he will be unhappy, or maybe someday somebody will tell, now this clinic doesn't work anymore, and so on. Okay, he will know then it's a wise thing to gather good people around you and talk about what you're longing for, and then find relationships, find steps to bring it into the world if it doesn't exist. And then the community will win and gain a lot and will change. I'm sure that it's a win-win-win situation. It has been in this clinic, and all the time again, he will be one of the winners if they do it that way.
Okay, I'm sharing a case. It's a boy, about 8 years old, and it's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, emotional disorder, and very aggressive. So when he studies in school, he even often has beating his classmates. So the classmates' parents just were very angry with him. And the boy, his parents divorced. He just lived with his father and his grandparents. But his father is employed at home, and the whole family is taken care of by his grandmother. So the grandmother is under great pressure because he thinks, his son and his grandson is so, is special, and the boy's mother also left the home because he divorced. So the grandmother feel very great pressure, and he think the neighborhoods or his neighbors just is not friendly to him and hostile to him. So the grandmother also very, is emotional and complains a lot. So and there are very often the conflicts between the neighbors with the families. So the pressure from the boy and his family bring much challenge for the school and the society and the community. And the boy and his family has a link between school and the community. So the school and the community want to do something to better the boys and his family's situation. So they get together to develop a plan for the boy and his family. And it's about a month, about 2 or 3 meetings. They just together discussed and developed the plan. And they just think about what the school can do, what the school should do to help the child, and the society, the community think about what they can do and what they should do. So with their cooperation, the social workers and the psychologists pay a visit to the family to have a family intervention, and the doctors to give the child medical intervention, and the school teachers just to develop the boys' interest of music and have a positive behavior intervention. And also the teacher just told parents, classmates' parents, the story of the child, and to the parents listen to the story and feel pity for the boy. So and some of the parents think, his mother is left home. His mother is not around him, so I will be his mother. And his father is just is violence and fist. So maybe I will be his father. I can take care of him. So they just give the boy much kindness and much patience and much support. So and after maybe 2 years later, the boy make much progress, and he can get well along with with his classmates, and his behavior is much better now. And it is surprisingly, but except the development of the boy, his family changed. His father became more positive, and he tried to find a job, and his grandmother changed. He get along with the neighbors, and then he think the neighbors is very friendly to her, to his family. So she feel very, very happy. And to the residents of the community, they also now he knows story of the boy and his family. Now he can feel much passionate for them, and also they are friendly to them and to give their support to the boy and his family. So that's maybe it's a happy ending of the boy. Okay.
So when we're framing what person-centered planning is, we're drawing on Beth Mount and her 4 cornerstones of person-centered planning. The first one of those is finding the gift in the person. And that can sound maybe a little bit American and like we're looking for gifted people or really talented people. But what it is the idea that everyone has something quite special about them. And a lot of us need help from people around us to figure out what that is. We don't have to be the best at that, but it's about finding out what makes someone tick, what makes someone smile in the morning. You can find these things out in various ways, but it could be to ask a question like, what would an ideal day look like for you? What would happen when you wake up in the morning? Or what are the things you think about when you feel really good? So those kind of questions are utilised then to find out what the gift in the person is.
And then the second cornerstone is building relationships of commitment. So it's people coming together, thinking together, and then coming up with ways of supporting each other, helping each other, but also thinking about what might be common interests or topics that we have in common and that we like to share. So it's also mutual recognition, recognizing each other's interests, each other's gifts, and therefore creating a support circle that not only supports the one person that is having their person-centered planning, but also kind of looking at how can we benefit from each other. For example, 2 people finding out that they're each big soccer fans and they just go and watch games together on Saturday because it's more fun to do it together than to do it on your own.
And the third of the cornerstones then is asking for more from organisations. So it's about acknowledging that, if someone is faced with a dilemma or has a problem, that it's not necessarily always that person that has full ownership of that problem. A lot of the times issues can be institutional or shared with other people in the same setting or with similar experiences. So it's really to look at how can the organisation that you're in possibly change or develop to support individuals or groups as well. So as an example, you could have a school setting and you might have students who are very uncomfortable with the school uniform policy of a school and say, actually, this sort of gendered dress code doesn't work for us. It makes us feel very uncomfortable. And as a teacher, you might become aware that actually I have a student in my class that feels this way. There could be other students in the school that have similar experiences. So why don't we try and empower the students to and have an influence and have a say, and how can we make the school policy more inclusive, and how can we have an impact, and ask for that from organisations as opposed to always helping an individual cope with the situation or overcome the barrier.
And then the fourth cornerstone we call digging into the social gold mines of community. Beth Mount has a bit longer title for that, but for us it really comes down to looking at where are people that we can rely on, where's people that can support us, or where's opportunities, places, things that happen that are good for us that we can use, that we can need. So it's really looking at chances, places, connections for people to thrive. So it's really good to look at or look for different people in a circle, look for different participants in planning, because the diversity is what makes the richness and what helps us look for those social gold mines.
What are the differences between the person-centered planning and other forms of planning?
Oh, there are so many different forms of planning. And if you are on a traditional way, there are some experts, and these experts have their experts' knowledge, and there are different existing opportunities or options in the system. And the task for the experts is to find out which person is fitting in which option. And these options are based, in most of the cases, on medical diagnosis and in deficits. So for processes in person-centered planning, it's very different to use such an approach like that. And the quality of if you could call it individual support planning, the quality of it is that the experts should be very good in finding the right option for the right person. That's the quality of diagnostics. And some people call it the way of thinking in triangles, because there are these different options, different triangles, and the person is, by thinking, looking like another triangle, and then it fits there, or it fits there, or it fits there. And it is no question who has the power. The experts. And the person is just the object of the experts. Person-centered planning is quite different. And I'm talking about two pictures we don't have here now, done by John O'Brien, one of the grandfathers of person-centered planning. And the second picture is person-centered planning is a symbol for another way of thinking, sitting together at a round table, and all the people don't have triangle heads, but egg heads, also circles. And they try to find out new options, and the main person who has the planning process is also there at the table. Maybe the mother, the father, friends, relatives. So it's a much more diverse group of people who are experts in different ways. And the quality of the whole process is something else than before. In the other option, the quality is that everyone is able or has the chance to contribute and to participate in the planning process. So that's a different understanding of quality. And of course, the power is in the whole circle. Everyone has some power, and it's not just power of experts and the person is the object of the experts, but everyone is sitting there and is more or less equal, of course also different. And the power is spread around the whole circle. So these are quite different understandings of planning processes. Yeah, we talked about the four cornerstones. We talked about the way of thinking in person-centered planning and the way it is not taught in person-centered planning. Now we come to practices. And for practices in person-centered planning, there are some principles. For example, the common thinking. There's not a single person thinking about something, but people together. People are coming together, and what is very important that there is real freedom of planning processes. There's no expert telling you, now you have to do it. But it's a question, if you want to do it, you have to decide for yourself when to do it. And of course, you are also responsible for the agenda, what it's about. What is your question? What is the topic you're not sure about, or you don't know how to handle it, and in many cases it's about my future. I have no idea how my future will be. And for person-centered planning, it's very important to have the perspective of the main person. That means person-centered, of course. But also the perspective of the whole circle, because the person is not alone, and it's always a combination of what the person thinks and says and what the circle thinks and says. One more principle is that person-centered planning works with posters, with visualization, because it's very good for the whole group to see at the wall, what did we talk about until now, what are our steps until now. And there is a second important thing to have posters, to have posters is slowing down the process. So everyone has more time to get ideas, or to have some thoughts, or some maybe crazy ideas. And all ideas are okay. There's no competition. My idea is better than yours, or my idea is better than yours. All ideas are okay and will have their place on the poster. These are, I think, the main principles of person-centered planning, but they are very practically. And there, in the next step, I would like to talk about the different ways of planning. There are two ways of working with that approach. One is called person-centered thinking, and the other one is called person-centered planning. And sometimes people say person-centered thinking are the small ones you can use everywhere, in school, with your team, in your classroom, wherever, in a church or in a choir, or wherever you are. You can use them for reflecting and thinking about things. And the second one are the big ones. You need more people and it's more time needed for them. So I will talk just a little bit about the person-centered thinking. And there are hundreds of different examples of posters which are used. One of them is the donut. And the donut is just 3 circles with the same center. And the donut, for example, can be used to think about, what is my responsibility? What is in the center of my responsibility? What do I have to do? Really have to do. The second circle could be, what is nice to do, but I'm not forced to do it. It's not my duty or my responsibility. So I can do it if I have time and if I have power. And the third one is, that's not my responsibility. It's not up to me to do that. And sometimes it can be helpful to make that clear for different people in the same situation. Who is responsible for that? And of course you can talk about it without a poster, of course. But it can be helpful to have this visualization, to have a picture together. Or another example could be if there is For example, in a classroom, one student very marginalized, very outside of the others. There is one poster you can think about steps to come from presence, just being in a situation, to active participation in a situation. And there are some steps in between. So you can sit together in your team, maybe with the parents, hopefully with a student, or maybe not. It's depending on the situation. And you can think about how to come from simple presence to participation in situations. Just 2 examples how you can work with a so-called small ways of person-centered thinking. And you can find in the internet hundreds of them. Helen Sanderson in the UK is one of the very well-known and very experienced persons who publish a lot of them.
And the other form is the ways of person-centered planning. And in the contrast to what Andreas just introduced, person-centered ways of planning start with the whole preparation process. So first, it starts with the person planning, thinking about what question do I have? What issue am I facing at the moment? And Judith Snow once said, great questions are the ones who refuse to be answered. So it's not about what do I like for dinner tomorrow, but maybe who will I be when I grow up? Where shall I work? So it's a big question that is maybe in need of some more people to think of that question together. When I have a question, when I have something that I would like to talk about, I start with a relationship map. So it's about writing down all the names of people that are in my life that I know, people that I care about. And then the second step, when I have all those names written down, it's thinking about who shall be part of my planning process. So whom shall I invite to my person-centered planning? Also, another important thing when preparing for the planning is thinking about how's the setup? Where do I want it to happen? Maybe in a nice room like this, or maybe in my living room, and what kind of food, what kind of decorations do I want? Also, it's important to find somebody to facilitate. And in person-centered planning, as Andreas mentioned, the posters, it's mostly important to find 2 facilitators. One is facilitating the graphic process, so designing the posters, making sure that everything what is being said is depicted on the posters. And the other person is facilitating the discussion, the planning process itself, making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And so there's a lot of steps to be undertaken in order to prepare and get ready for the meeting. And then during the meeting, there's various forms of creating those meetings. For example, there's 2 more well-known steps, which are called maps and paths, which are kind of a set of questions that help us think together, help us come up with ideas and plans, and also help us how to get from dreams to steps, how to actually follow through with what we have dreamt together. And what I really like about person-centered planning, for example, I had myself a person-centered planning for me, and when we had the round of ideas, there were people bringing in ideas that I've never thought of. So it's a richness of ideas. It's the realm of the people being there, just bringing together ideas, sharing dreams, sharing visions. And the other part I really enjoy is when we look at what is the person really good at? What is their strengths? What is their gifts? And I once facilitated a meeting for a young man. He was about to start into his job life, and people had index cards and thought about what is his gifts, what is his strength. And then we took turns bringing those cards to him and read them out loud. And with each card that was handed to him, he kind of grew a little bit. So at first he was sitting like this, and at the end he was sitting really tall and smiling, and he was shining. And I really like watching this, and it's something that we can all benefit from in a planning process.
So person-centered planning comes from the disability field, but is it just a disability thing?
Some think yes, but it isn't, I would say. The start was in the field of disabilities, but even if you think about Marshall Forest, it had nothing to do with disability. And I would say it can be helpful for every person who doesn't know how to go on. Very simple. Every person who has big questions or great questions. So it's good for everyone.
And so it sounds like a really good framework to use. But surely there must be some challenges as well. And you've worked in the field, so what are the difficulties with use in person-centered planning?
Yeah, I'm still enthusiastic about that after 30 years. But of course, there are lots of challenges. It starts already with cultural traditions. And I remember many situations, the evening before the meeting, the families had big discussions. Do we really need them? Do we really have to make our challenges public? Are we not able to solve our problems by ourselves? So in countries where it's not so common to call people and bring them together and to sit together and think together and dream together, dreaming, what is that? That's strange, that's crazy, that's maybe for hippies or some subculture people or so. Another challenge. Also, there are lots of challenges for facilitators, making sure that every voice is really heard. And in the same moment, not to put people under stress. Now you have to tell me. What is your dream? It can be very difficult. So facilitation of person-centered processes is really something like an art, you could say. And sometimes there are dynamics coming up, for example, competition between persons sitting there. For example, a competition between the mother, the primary teacher, the secondary teacher. Who knows best how to protect this person? Or it could be a family where the parents are divorced and the father is not on the scene for the most time. So every time the father says something, the mother's, oh, he has an idea. Wonderful, great. So there could be also processes of devaluing people. So facilitation is really a big challenge. And sometimes people have the feeling they are not able to find a gift. Everything is difficult, everything is terrible. There are no people around. There's nothing they can do. And then as a facilitator, you have to try to reframe it. And even the most terrible situation could have a potential to do something. So it's not so easy, but it has a high potential. I just said it's good for everyone who doesn't know how to go on. And there are there's a wide spectrum of people. For example, I remember one person-centered process for a child being 5 years old. And of course, in the background, the child didn't say, I want person-centered planning. But it was the family, it were the parents who said, we think about going to school and how can we do it? I feel powerless and I don't know how to do it. So in the background, it's a systemic understanding of person-centeredness. And on the other end of the spectrum, there was my mother being 85, and she wanted to go to a seniors home and wanted to live her last years there. And she didn't know what would happen there in that home. So I had the need for person-centered planning for her. And we did something very strange. We were collecting people sitting together, but my mother wasn't there because she didn't feel well. And so we did it without her, which is not correct if you work in a person-centered way, that the main person is not there. But that was the situation. And on one hand, you have to be flexible and you have to adapt to the situation and the context and the culture you are in. And on the other hand, there are some principles which are really important. That's why we took the 4 cornerstones to the beginning of this section.
How did the person-centered planning start? Where is it come from?
Yeah, a long time ago, once upon a time, there was a woman called Marsha Forrest. She was working at one of the universities in Toronto, and she read some wonderful poems of a young lady, and she tried to catch the lady to university to talk with her, and she found out this young lady called Judith Snow was living in a seniors' home, and she was shocked. And then she started to think, how can we support her so she can she can have her own flat, she can have her own money, and she is not any longer in a seniors' home. And the reason why she was in a seniors' home being 20 years old or so was that her parents were not able to care about her during the night because she had to be turned around. So they started the first circle. They called it first Circle of Friends. Later they called it Circle of Support. And they worked until Judith had her own flat and she had her own assistants in her flat. And they say this was the first person all over the world who had that. But the story is not over. Some years later, Marsha Forrest got a terrible diagnosis having breast cancer. And Judith was the one who said, oh, now let's meet again, let's build a support circle and let's think about what has to be done. Who cares about the cat? Who cares about the plants? Who cares about the fishes in the aquarium? And who goes every Friday to your mother having tea time together? And who's accompanying you to your next therapy setting. So they did, and this story unfortunately has not a happy end because Marsha died some years later. But you can see that it was just a very practical start in Toronto, people caring about one another and supporting one another. And from that starting point out, person-centered planning was spreading in many countries in many different situations.
So Persia, what Sarah's comes to my mind for you?
So if I was to apply a theory now obviously the model or person-centered planning came from practice, like you said. And thinking about it now, we feel there are so many different theories that could help explain why it works as well as it does. And the one that comes to mind for me would be Carl Rogers' person-centered approach, which is from the area of psychology and more of a therapeutic theory, but a lot of it helps us explain. So it's really central in Carl Rogers' theory as well that we have this fundamental belief that everyone's an expert in their own life. So that's where that kind of person-centered aspect comes in. And also, in order for someone to grow and realise their own potential and live their best life, that is dependent on us developing mutually optimistic and warm and understanding relationships with others around us, important people to us. And that in turn helps us develop our self-awareness that we need in order to make transitions from school to employment and in life in general, and can also be really beneficial to our sense of self-esteem or self-confidence. So to me, Carl Rogers' work is really relevant for this, even if it wasn't where it started. And Rogers would also have said, I mean, his theory also came from practice, and he would have been a great believer in theory should come from practice. So to me, it makes a lot of, Rogers really helped me understand how person-centered planning works, why it works.
So, Cedra, what comes to mind for you?
Well, when I look at person-centered planning and the ways of person-centered planning, I really refer to Otto Scharmer's theory U. Otto Scharmer, he's an ecologist, and he basically says there's two different ways of dealing with problems or answering questions. The one short way kind of is downloading knowledge and things that we have already tried. So it's relying on our present knowledge. But he says it just creates more of the same things that we already have. And as we have mentioned in person-centered planning, he also refers to a second way of resolving questions or tackling problems, which is, first of all, facing questions with an open heart, an open mind, and an open will, and trying to let go of things that we already know and things we have tried before, and kind of go through a U process. That's why he calls his theory U. It starts with going down the U, letting go of present knowledge, letting go of things that we might know beforehand, but being open, being present, having an open heart, having an open will, and kind of creating a generative field where we, in presence together, think of and dream of new ideas, new topics. He calls that prototypes that we come up with together and then put into practice. So it's listening to each other, being open to new ideas, being open to whatever wants to be born, and then putting these ideas into practice, testing if those are possible solutions or answers to the questions that we face. So also, as you said, he has never himself brought it into contact with person-centered planning, but for me it's a really nice explanation or way of explaining why person-centered planning can be successful.
And Anders, which theory do you think of?
I think of Pierre Bourdieu, and he never had contact with person-centered planning as the others, because I think his theory of capital is a good explanation for what is happening in person-centered planning processes. He divides between economic capital, social capital, and cultural capital. And he would argue maybe that person-centered planning is a process of increasing social capital in a very intensive way, because you get more persons in your life, you have more knowledge in your life, you are more included in different situations, and that would make your situation, if you look not just to financial capital but all the other categories of capital, that makes your situation, if you are the main person in person-centered planning, much better than before. Or it's not automatically, but you have big chances, you have good chances to have a growing process. As someone of you said before, sometimes you can see people growing in these processes.
We were trying to think of, there's a lot of talk in this in this recording, and if we were keen for you to just take one piece from this today and one bit of learning about person-centered planning, that would be really the importance of looking at a person as a whole, and as someone with a future, and that this person-centered planning can really facilitate that.
Okay, now it's up to you on how to start.